A millionaire CEO steps into his car and hears a 7-year-old black girl telling him to be quiet. He could never have imagined the reason. "Shut up and don't say anything." The voice pierced the silence of the parking garage like a blade. Jameson Reed, CEO of Reed Tech Systems, stopped mid-step, one hand still gripping the handle of his black BMW. The voice had come from inside the car. He peered through the tinted glass. His eyes, adjusting to the low light, caught the outline of a small figure curled up in the back seat. A little black girl, no older than 7, eyes wide and terrified. "They're listening," she whispered, motioning toward the tall, glass-paneled building behind him. "Your business partner and that blonde woman, they said you'd be here now." Jameson's heart pounded. He was 52 years old, a self-made millionaire who had turned Reed Tech into a $200 million tech empire. He had trusted Maurice Graves, his co-founder, for 15 years. And Kennedy Brooks, his loyal executive assistant, had practically run his life for a decade. "How did you get into my car?" he asked quietly, sliding into the driver's seat, careful not to spook her. The cleaning lady left it unlocked when she left. "I climbed in and waited," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I heard them talking upstairs. They didn't see me. They said tomorrow you won't own anything anymore." His entire body stiffened. Tomorrow was the day of the merger, an international deal with the Japanese conglomerate Saito and Kisher, worth over $400 million. A deal that Maurice and Kennedy had both meticulously planned and prepared. "What else did you hear?" he asked, glancing at his phone screen, though his attention stayed fixed on the 10th floor windows glowing above. "That you're gullible. That you sign stuff without reading it too closely." The blonde lady laughed and said you'd be looking for a new job the day after tomorrow. The girl's shoulders curled inward. "They said other mean stuff too. But my grandma said kids don't repeat nasty words." Jameson stared at her, unsure whether to feel anger or awe. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Nyla." "And you're Jameson Reed," she added quickly. "I heard them say it 1,000,000 times." Then her voice dipped lower. "You're gonna turn me in now, huh?" Jameson looked at her through the rear-view mirror. Despite the dirt on her face, her eyes shone with a keen intelligence. She'd risked everything to warn him, someone she didn't even know. For the first time in weeks, a genuine smile touched his lips. "No, Nyla. Actually, you might have just saved my entire life's work." He looked up. The office lights on the 10th floor were turning off one by one. Maurice and Kennedy were likely on their way down now, convinced tomorrow would be the day they erased Jameson from his own company. But what they didn't know was that a small girl had given Jameson the one thing they hadn't accounted for: time. As he drove out of the parking garage and into the cold city night, his mind began moving a mile a minute. Every instinct screamed betrayal. Every memory with Maurice and Kennedy felt suddenly rewritten. But as he glanced again at Nyla in the back seat, one question echoed louder than all the rest. Why would a 7-year-old risk everything to save a stranger? That answer would become more important than anything else, and would change not just his revenge, but his understanding of family, loyalty, and justice forever. Jameson drove in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. City lights blurred past the windows as he tried to process what Nyla had told him. In the rear-view mirror, she remained still, her eyes darting between reflections, alert and ready to duck if needed. "Did they say anything else?" he asked, his voice low, almost casual. Nyla nodded. "The blonde lady said you're like an obedient puppy, and that tomorrow you'll learn that puppies get bit too." The words stung more than he'd expected. 15 years working side by side with Maurice, 10 years of trusting Kennedy with every detail of his life, and now he was nothing more than a joke to them. A tool. A fool. "Where do you live, Nyla?" he asked, stopping at a red light and turning slightly to look at her. She shrugged, casual in a way no child should be. "Nowhere specific. Sometimes the shelter, sometimes outside. Depends if there's room. Or if the older kids aren't being mean." His chest tightened. "You've been living like that? Alone?" "I had my grandma, but she got sick. Since she died, I just try not to bother anyone." Jameson studied her face. Her expression was calm, composed. Too composed. "Why'd you warn me?" he asked. "You don't even know who I am." Nyla looked out the window. "Because I know what it's like when people pretend you're invisible. They were talking about you like you're nothing. Like you're dumb. My grandma used to say, if you see someone getting stepped on and you can help, you help. 'Cause next time it could be you." The light turned green, but he didn't move. The words hit harder than anything he'd heard in years. Spoken with the raw truth only a child could offer. He exhaled and gently pressed the gas. 20 minutes later, they sat in a near-empty diner. Nyla sat across from him, her small hands wrapped around a burger almost as big as her head. She took big bites, eating fast but careful not to drop anything. Jameson barely touched his coffee. His phone buzzed on the table. A message from Maurice. "Ready for tomorrow, brother. The Japanese will love what we've built. This is your legacy. You'll be retiring with pride." He held the screen up so Nyla could see. She raised an eyebrow, her mouth full. "Wow, he really acting like nothing's going on. That's cold." "Yeah," Jameson muttered. "Maurice has always been good with charm. And Kennedy, she's the one who knows everything. My passwords, my schedule, where I keep sensitive documents." Another buzz. This time Kennedy. "I went over the merger papers again tonight. Everything's in order for you to sign tomorrow. As always, just trust me." Kay, he stared at the screen. Her words dripped with rehearsed warmth. "As always, just trust me. You gonna let them do it?" Nyla asked, licking ketchup off her fingers. Jameson looked up. "No, but they can't know that I know." Her eyes twinkled. "That's smart." "You're smart," he said. "How do you remember so much of what they said?" Nyla shrugged. "When you don't have anything, you learn to listen to everything." He leaned back, finally smiling, not out of comfort but out of recognition. She saw what others didn't, heard what others ignored. And she was right. They all thought he was slow, sentimental, weak. But they were wrong. His phone rang. It was Maurice. He answered, keeping his voice light. "Jameson, glad you picked up. Kennedy and I have been here working out the final touches. You resting up? Tomorrow's the big day." "I'm good, man. Can't wait to see it all come together," he said smoothly. "Don't worry about the paperwork. Kennedy's got it all prepped. Just sign and smile. You deserve to enjoy this." Jameson nodded into the receiver. "Looking forward to it." After hanging up, Nyla leaned across the table, examining his face. "You're plotting something. Your eyes got that look." He gave a quiet laugh. She wasn't wrong. Every smirk, every patronizing message, every lie he'd swallowed over the past year now had new meaning. Maurice and Kennedy hadn't just betrayed him, they'd underestimated him. And that was going to be their biggest mistake. The next morning, Jameson awoke before the sun. For the first time in months, he felt clear. Focused. The kind of clarity that only comes after betrayal sharpens every instinct. Nyla was still curled up on the living room couch, her small frame wrapped in one of his old throws. She looked peaceful, but he knew better. That girl didn't rest. Not really. She was always listening. He moved quietly through the kitchen, making coffee, trying to stay calm. But his thoughts raced. They think today is the day they win. His phone buzzed. 6:15 a.m. A message from Kennedy. "Good morning, boss. I've been in the office since 5 a.m. prepping everything. The Japanese delegation arrives at 2. Just trust me and sign where I've marked as always. K." The nerve. Acting like nothing had changed. He turned to find Nyla stretching on the couch, rubbing her eyes. She sat up, blinking at him. "You're thinking hard," she said. "You got that same look my grandma had when she figured someone was lying." He smiled faintly. "I need your help today." Her back straightened. "What kind?" "I want you to go back to the office building. Same floor. Same hallway. See what else you can hear. If they're planning anything last minute, I want to know." She froze. "That's dangerous." "I know," he said gently. "That's why you won't go alone." He picked up his phone and scrolled to a name he hadn't called in over a year. Elijah Cole. A private investigator. Ex-detective. One of the sharpest minds he'd ever hired. Kennedy and Maurice had pushed him out last year, citing budget issues. Jameson had barely questioned it then. Now he knew why. He hit call. Elijah answered on the second ring. "Jameson Reed. That's a name I didn't expect. I figured I was just another one of Morris's budget cuts." "That wasn't my call," Jameson said. "And now I need you. Urgently." A pause. Then a quiet chuckle. Knew it. That man always had shifty eyes. "What's going on?" "Meet me at my house in an hour. Bring everything you need. You're going back to work." Exactly 70 minutes later, Elijah sat at Jameson's kitchen table, his rugged face unreadable, as he listened. Nyla sat beside him, legs swinging off the chair, her hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate. She heard everything? Elijah asked, his gaze bouncing between them. Word for word, Jameson said. Elijah raised an eyebrow. Kid's sharp. She's more than sharp, Jameson said. She's the only reason I'm not walking into that boardroom blind. Nyla sipped her drink and said, My grandma always told me, if you're poor, your ears have to work twice as hard. Elijah cracked a rare smile. That's not wrong. He opened his laptop, tapping quickly. I've been watching Kennedy's and Morris's public movements ever since they pushed me out. At first, I thought they were just playing office politics. But it's worse than that. He turned the screen. Emails. Shell companies. Fake clients. Doctored invoices. They've siphoned more than $5 million from your company in the last 2 years. The merger with Saito and Kinshir? It's a cover. Money laundering. They just need you to sign. Once you do, they validate the fake contracts. Clean slate. And then they push you out. Jameson clenched his jaw. They didn't just lie. They built a whole empire on my back. And they think you're still asleep, Elijah said. Which is exactly what we'll let them believe. Nyla leaned in. So what's the plan? We going full movie style? Jameson smiled. Something like that. Elijah nodded slowly. We need 2 things. 1, undeniable proof, enough that even a good lawyer can't spin it. 2, the element of surprise. We walk in like it's a regular day. We let them talk. Let them incriminate themselves. And we record it. Nyla asked, her voice eager. Exactly, Elijah said. You'll wear a mic. I'll be close by. And Jameson, while they're busy gloating, you'll be handing off the real merger documents and evidence to the feds. Jameson stared at the child who had flipped his world upside down. She looked back steady and calm. Think you're up for this? He asked. Nyla smirked. I warned you, didn't I? Let's finish what we started. By 9:30 a.m., the plan was in motion. Elijah loaded Nyla into his black SUV, a subtle wireless mic stitched into the collar of her hoodie. She looked down at it, curious. Will it beep or light up? She asked. Nope, Elijah said, checking the signal from his tablet. Completely silent. Just like you. She grinned. Good. I don't want them to know I'm the reason they're about to fall. Outside, the city was waking up. Pedestrians hurried past crosswalks. Delivery trucks backed into alleyways. But inside that SUV, it felt like something else entirely, a mission. A countdown. Back in his house, Jameson paced his office. Documents covered the desk. Screens flashed with Elijah's findings, bank transfers, dummy corporations, side communications between Kennedy and Maurice under code names. They had been thorough, but they hadn't been perfect. Jameson found what they'd overlooked. Years of backlogs. Conflicting timestamps. Deleted messages Kennedy didn't realize he had archived during a server migration. And then there was Nyla, the one piece of the puzzle they never accounted for. At 10:12 a.m., Elijah's voice crackled over the encrypted line. She's inside. Jameson held his breath. Where exactly? He asked. Conference hall floor. Corner hallway outside the main boardroom. She's near the janitor's closet, crouched behind a divider. Jameson's chest tightened. Anyone nearby? Elijah scanned the live feed. Maurice just walked into the lounge. Kennedy's in the hall on the phone. On the recording, Nyla's soft voice whispered, she's saying he's still clueless. That you'll be signing before you even ask a question. A pause. She just said, we'll be sipping champagne by sunset. Jameson's fists clenched. The image of Kennedy's wide, faux sincere smile flashed in his mind. For 10 years, she'd stood beside him. Called him boss. Picked out birthday gifts for his mother. Remembered every meeting. Every password. And this whole time, she was waiting to pull the rug out from under him. He opened his encrypted email draft and attached the full folder of evidence Elijah had compiled. Spreadsheets, bank reports, email threads, fake invoices. The kind of file that didn't allege fraud, it proved it. A federal agent contact, someone Elijah had vetted personally, would receive it at exactly 2:15 p.m. the moment the meeting began. The moment the trap snapped shut. Another update from Elijah came through. Nyla just caught something big. Maurice mentioned clearing the Cayman account by midnight. That's your offshore slush fund, isn't it? Jameson nodded grimly. It was. I used it during our first international expansion. I haven't touched it in years. Well, he has. Jameson's throat went dry. How much? Close to 200 grand. Last transaction was 6 days ago. The betrayal burrowed deeper. They hadn't just set him up to lose, they were already spending the victory. Back in the building, Kennedy stepped into the hallway where Nyla was hidden. Her voice rang out, falsely cheerful. Maurice, I double-checked the post-its on the contracts. I made sure they're in the exact order he's used to signing. Jameson's jaw tightened. Kennedy laughed. He's going to walk in, shake hands, make small talk, and then boom. Done. His signature next to ours. We'll own every division. And he'll walk out thinking he's still CEO. Morris's voice followed. Then we give it 2 weeks. We'll tell the board he's stepping down. Quietly, respectfully. He won't even know it's happening. They laughed again. Elijah's voice cut in. You still with me, Jameson? I'm here, he said. Good. Because we've got what we need. He heard Nyla's tiny voice again, calm as ever. Do I stay? Head back, Elijah said gently. You've already done more than most adults I've worked with. Nyla responded with one word. Copy. Jameson sat in silence, staring out the window, the city bustling below. Maurice and Kennedy thought they'd orchestrated the perfect finale, but they didn't realize the script had been rewritten. And this time, the ending would be theirs to suffer. Back at the house, Nyla walked through the door with a casualness that didn't match the bombshell she'd just dropped on Jameson's entire life. She pulled off her hoodie, handed Elijah the tiny mic, then hopped up on the couch like she'd just come from a regular day at school. You get everything? She asked. Jameson nodded slowly. Every word. Then what's next? She asked, grabbing an apple from a fruit bowl. Elijah closed the laptop with a firm click. Now we prepare the stage. Jameson stood silently, arms crossed, staring at the floor. For years, he believed that competence and loyalty were the backbone of his leadership team. That if you worked hard and gave people opportunities, they'd return that with honor. But all it took was 2 people and $5 million to burn it to the ground. They were never loyal, he muttered. They were just waiting. Elijah's voice was steady. Greed doesn't show up with horns and red eyes. Sometimes it walks in smiling, holding your calendar, asking if you want coffee. Nyla took a bite of her apple. Grandma used to say the worst ones always look friendly. Jameson turned to her, struck again by how effortlessly her wisdom cut through the noise. What was your grandma's name? Joelle, she said, mouth full. Joelle Carter. He made a mental note. The name rang a bell. He couldn't say why yet. But it did. Elijah opened his briefcase and laid out 2 sealed folders. Here's the plan. First, we hand off all this evidence to the federal fraud team. I've already made contact. They'll be monitoring the merger meeting in real time. If we time it right, they'll have probable cause to arrest both Maurice and Kennedy in the building. He handed one folder to Jameson. Second, we don't act like we know anything. You walk into that boardroom like you've done 100 times before. You shake their hands. Smile. Let them dig their own grave. Jameson opened the folder. Inside were timelines, timestamps, and a clear breakdown of what needed to happen by the minute. At exactly 2:10, Elijah continued, You stall. Ask for water. Ask for clarification. Do not sign anything. Jameson nodded. And at 2:15, the feds walk in. Documents in hand. Charges ready. And Nyla's audio files already logged as primary evidence. Nyla beamed. I'm going to be part of a real takedown. Jameson smiled. You are the takedown. Elijah's face softened. She's earned it. Then, turning to Jameson, he added, one last thing. There's a chance they panic before the deal is fully set. If Kennedy or Maurice tries to bolt, we need to have security on standby. I'll handle it, Jameson said firmly. I'll call in my personal security detail. Tell them it's a lockdown situation, code Amber. No one leaves the 10th floor unless I say so. He looked at Nyla, whose legs were swinging off the edge of the couch. You still good with going with me to the office? She tilted her head. You want me there during the meeting? You don't have to say anything, Jameson said. Just be there. A witness. And a reminder. A reminder of what? He paused, then smiled softly. That not everyone underestimates the quiet ones. Nyla grinned. Let's make sure they find that out the hard way. As Elijah packed up and checked his devices one last time, Jameson stepped into the hallway and made a call to an old contact at Saito and Kinshur. Mr. Takeda, he said when the man answered. There's something I need you to know before we finalize anything today. He spoke for 5 minutes, low and precise. When he finished, Mr. Takeda's only response was, "We will delay our arrival by 30 minutes. Thank you for your integrity, Mr. Reed." Jameson hung up, his hand steady. Today wouldn't end in betrayal. It would end in reckoning. By 1:15 p.m., the 10th floor of Reed Tech buzzed with artificial calm. The assistants typed with perfect posture. Phones rang in muted tones. The boardroom had been cleaned twice. Every detail was in place, just as Kennedy had orchestrated. She walked the perimeter of the room with a clipboard in hand, her tailored blazer crisp and unwrinkled. A small earpiece tucked discreetly beneath her blonde hair. She checked the post-it tabs again, each one perfectly placed to guide Jameson's signature. Across the hall, Maurice leaned against the window with a glass of sparkling water, the city skyline glinting behind him. He looked every bit the confident partner, casual, composed, dangerous. "This is it," Kennedy said, tapping her pen against her notes. "By 2:15, this company will belong to us." Maurice raised his glass. "And Jameson will thank us for it." Meanwhile, in the private elevator, Jameson stood in silence beside Nyla. She wore clean jeans, a button-up shirt, and a jacket slightly too big for her small frame. Her hair had been brushed into neat puffs, and her expression was cool, focused. "You nervous?" Jameson asked as the elevator climbed. Nyla shook her head. "They're the ones who should be nervous." He smiled. "Fair point." At 1:30 sharp, the elevator doors opened. All eyes turned as Jameson stepped out calm, collected, and wearing the same tailored navy suit he'd worn when he signed his company's first $1 million contract. Behind him, Nyla emerged quietly, clutching a small notepad. Kennedy was the first to greet them, her arms open in mock affection. "There he is, the man of the hour." Jameson shook her hand, then turned to Maurice, who pulled him into a brief, familiar hug. "Today's the day," Maurice said. "Legacy time." Jameson smiled thinly. "Looking forward to it." Kennedy tilted her head at Nyla. "And who's this?" "My niece," Jameson said smoothly. "Thought she might learn something today. Never too early to teach the next generation, right?" Kennedy's smile faltered for half a second, but she nodded. "Of course. How lovely." They entered the boardroom. Documents were already laid out in neat piles. Bottles of imported water. Fresh coffee. Soft classical music played from a speaker in the corner. Maurice gestured to Jameson's seat. "We're just waiting on the Japanese delegation." They called, running a few minutes behind. Kennedy set a pen beside his place at the table. "Everything's ready. We've flagged the signature pages for you, yellow post-its as usual. Once you're done, we'll be ready to present to their team." Jameson nodded but didn't sit. Instead, he walked slowly around the table, fingers lightly brushing the edge, as if inspecting the grain of the wood. He stopped by the window. "Did you ever think about what it means," he said quietly, "to build something from nothing?" Maurice and Kennedy exchanged glances. "Of course," Maurice said. "We've all built this together." "Together," Jameson repeated, his voice distant. He turned to face them, the smile gone now. Nyla had taken a seat quietly in the corner, opening her notepad and writing something down. "I've been thinking a lot about trust lately," Jameson continued. "How it's earned, how it's betrayed." Kennedy stepped forward, her voice soft. "Jameson, is everything all right?" He looked at her. Directly. For the first time in a long time. "Do you trust me, Kennedy?" She blinked. "Of course I do." "Interesting," he said. "Because I don't trust you." A silence fell so sharp it could have sliced through stone. Maurice took a step forward. "Jameson, if this is some kind of—" "No," he said. "No games today. Not anymore." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper. Not the contracts. Not the merger paperwork. A transcript. From a recording. He placed it on the table and slid it across to Kennedy. She read the first few lines, and her face drained of color. "What is this?" she whispered. "Your words," he replied. "From the hallway this morning." Her eyes darted to Maurice, who stared at her, then at the page, realization crashing over him like a wave. Nyla closed her notebook. Elijah's voice came softly over the security line. "We're in position. Ready when you are." Jameson exhaled slowly. "Let's finish this," he said. Kennedy's hand trembled as she lowered the transcript. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Maurice stepped in quickly, the smoothness in his voice now coated with thinly veiled panic. "Jameson, come on. You're blowing this out of proportion. You know how people talk when they're stressed." It doesn't mean anything. Jameson tilted his head slightly, eyes calm but sharp. You think I'd confront you with this if I only had one recording? He reached back into his briefcase, this time pulling out a thin tablet. A few taps and the room filled with the unmistakable sound of Kennedy's voice, crystal clear and confident. He'll sign before he knows what he's doing. He always does. We'll have full control of the assets by 2:30. Start prepping the Cayman accounts. The playback ended. Silence. Nyla watched them from her corner, her small hands resting in her lap. Jameson could feel her gaze on him. Steady. Brave. Kennedy took a step back, her face pale. Where did you get that? Were you recording me? No, Jameson replied. She was. He gestured toward Nyla. Maurice blinked in confusion, then narrowed his eyes at the girl. That's impossible. She wasn't even in the room. She didn't need to be. She heard enough. And she's smarter than both of you combined. Nyla stood slowly. You talk too loud when you think no one's listening. Morris's voice turned hard. You're using a kid? That's unethical, Jameson. Jameson raised an eyebrow. You're embezzling millions, laundering money through a fake merger, and I'm unethical? He walked to the table and laid out several more documents. Financial reports, fake client invoices, matching transfers between Reed Tech and a network of shell companies. You set this up 2 years ago, he said. Slowly, carefully. You positioned yourselves as the experts while feeding me just enough to keep me comfortable. And I let you. That's on me. Elijah's voice came over the comm. 2 minutes. Morris's mask slipped further. This is ridiculous. You can't prove intent from a few words. Kennedy and I have legal protection. We've been co-owners of this process. Kennedy found her voice again, but it cracked as she spoke. This merger is good for the company, Jameson. That's all we ever wanted. No, Jameson said, his tone suddenly cutting. What you wanted was control. You wanted the money, the credit, the power. You wanted me out. You weren't just trying to take the company. You were trying to erase me from it. He walked over to Nyla and placed a hand gently on her shoulder. You would have gotten away with it if it weren't for her. The door opened behind them. 2 federal agents stepped in, their suits crisp, badges flashing under the fluorescent lights. Maurice turned, eyes wide. Wait, what is this? One agent stepped forward. Mr. Graves. Ms. Brooks. We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of corporate fraud, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and embezzlement of company funds. Kennedy staggered backward, clutching the edge of the table. Maurice growled, You can't do this. You don't have evidence. This is all hearsay. The second agent held up a USB drive. We have multiple recordings, financial records, testimonies, and corroborating statements from international contacts, including your communication with Mr. Takeda of Saito and Kinshur. Kennedy turned on Jameson, her voice trembling. You told them? You told the Japanese? I did, he said, because unlike you, they believe in honest partnerships. Morris's composure shattered. You planned this. You set us up. No, Jameson replied coldly. You set yourselves up. I just finally paid attention. As the agents moved to cuff them, Kennedy broke down. Please, don't do this. Jameson, we've known each other for 10 years. Exactly, he said. And in all that time, you never once thought I was smart enough to catch you. Nyla stepped beside him. Maybe next time, don't underestimate people. The agents led them out, their heels echoing down the hallway like the closing chapter of a book that should never have been written. Jameson stood still, heart pounding, as the boardroom emptied of its shadows. Nyla looked up at him. So is it over? He looked down at her and smiled. No, Nyla. This is just the beginning. 30 minutes later, the 10th floor felt like a different universe. The boardroom was quiet now. No post-it lace contracts, no whispered betrayals, no faux smiles. Just Jameson, Nyla, Elijah, and the agents packing up sealed evidence bags. From the far end of the corridor, a security officer waved a signal. They're gone. Jameson exhaled slowly, his shoulders finally lowering. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been carrying himself. Nyla leaned back in one of the leather chairs, her legs barely reaching the edge, spinning gently side to side. That was wild. Elijah chuckled. You handled it better than most adults I know. And I've seen a lot. Nyla grinned. I just imagined I was in a spy movie, with really dumb villains. Jameson sat across from her, watching her spin slowly, the weight of everything beginning to settle. You did more than imagine. You changed the ending. One of the agents approached Jameson with a clipboard. Mr. Reed, once we finish the transfer of evidence, we'll coordinate with your legal team and issue a public statement. We expect charges to be formally filed within 72 hours. You'll be informed of all proceedings. Jameson nodded. Thank you. And thank your team for acting fast. The agent smiled faintly. Honestly, most CEOs in your position never see it coming, or they ignore it until it's too late. You moved at exactly the right moment. As the agents left, Elijah flipped open his tablet. You've still got work to do, you know. I know, Jameson said. This company has a hole in it the size of 2 trusted people. Maybe more. I've got to rebuild my executive circle. Rewrite protocols. Secure the board. He rubbed his temples, already feeling the storm ahead. But it was a different kind of storm. One he could face. Nyla hopped off the chair and stretched. So what happens to Kennedy and Maurice now? They'll face court, Elijah said. Possibly jail. Depends on how many people they try to throw under the bus to save themselves. I bet they blame each other, Nyla muttered. Jameson nodded. No honor among thieves. Good, she said, because they didn't just try to steal your company. They tried to make you feel stupid. Jameson looked at her, struck by how accurately she named the real wound. It wasn't just betrayal, it was the insult of it. The years he'd spent trusting them, thinking of them as family, only to find out they saw him as weak, gullible, replaceable. You're right, he said quietly. People always think the quiet ones don't know what's going on, Nyla added, reaching for her jacket. But we do. We always do. Elijah smiled, watching her. Jameson, you ever consider mentorship programs here at Reed Tech? Jameson glanced at him. We've donated to a few. Nothing official. Elijah looked at Nyla. Might be time to start one. Something led by people who've lived it. She looked up, eyes wide. Like me. Exactly like you. Jameson smiled. We'll talk about it. He checked his watch. 3:25 p.m. The Japanese delegation would have been arriving right about now, if not for the call he made. Takeda-san had thanked him again via email and said they'd revisit the deal in a few months, on new terms, and with full respect for his leadership. For now, that could wait. He turned to Nyla. You hungry? She nodded instantly. Starving. Then let's go eat. Something real. She tilted her head. Like steak. Jameson smiled. Like the biggest steak you've ever seen. As they headed toward the elevator, she reached up and grabbed his hand without a word. And just like that, in the silence of a now honest office floor, Jameson realized he hadn't lost anything today. He'd only just started finding what really mattered. The restaurant Jameson chose sat on the 42nd floor of a glass-paneled tower, overlooking the river and the city's jagged skyline. It was upscale, linen napkins, soft jazz humming in the background, the kind of place where business deals were sealed with handshakes over aged scotch. But today, there were no contracts. No hidden agendas. Just him and Nyla. She sat across from him, her face barely peeking above the polished wood table, eyes wide at the massive steak set in front of her. It sizzled lightly on the plate, the scent catching her attention like a magnet. Are you sure I can eat all this? She asked. Jameson chuckled. Try. I've seen men twice your size tap out halfway through. Nyla picked up her fork and knife, then paused. Is this what rich people eat every day? He smiled, pouring her a glass of apple juice from the carafe the waiter had just brought. Not always, but I figured today calls for something special. She took a bite and let out a dramatic gasp. Okay, this is the best thing I've ever tasted. Jameson leaned back, watching her eat with childlike abandon. For a moment, the weight of the last 48 hours lifted. No Maurice. No Kennedy. No betrayal. Just this, an unlikely friendship born from one whispered warning in the back seat of a car. You know, he said, I used to think success was about the numbers. The buildings, the contracts, the private jets. But sitting here, watching you eat like a champion, I think I've been missing the point. Nyla wiped her mouth with the cloth napkin, carefully mimicking the adults around her. What's the point then? He thought for a moment. Maybe the point is not building something impressive. Maybe it's building something true. Something that can't be stolen. She looked at him for a long moment, chewing slowly. Grandma used to say, you don't really own something unless it means something to you. He nodded. Then I've been owning the wrong things. They sat in silence for a while, eating, watching the sun begin its slow descent toward the horizon. Then Nyla said, "Do you think the others knew?" Jameson looked at her. "The other employees?" She nodded. That Kennedy and Maurice were doing all that bad stuff. He exhaled. Some might have suspected, but most were probably just trying to keep their heads down. People convince themselves not to see things that don't feel safe to notice. "That's sad," she said. "If they all said something earlier, you might have known." "You're right," he said, "but most people wait for someone else to speak up." She looked down at her plate, quiet for a beat. Then, without looking up, she said, "I didn't wait." "No," he said, his voice soft. "You didn't." And that's when it really sank in, not just that she had helped him, but that she had led him. In her own quiet, brave, brilliant way, she had turned the tide. Not for reward, not for praise, just because it was right. A sudden knock on the table broke his thought. The waiter approached and leaned in. "Mr. Reed, I just received a call from your assistant. The new interim legal team is confirming the internal audit for tomorrow morning. Would you like to approve the schedule now?" Jameson waved gently. "Tell them I'll call in an hour." The waiter nodded and left. Nyla raised an eyebrow. "You got a new assistant already?" "No," he said, chuckling. "Just a temporary coordinator. I'm taking my time with replacements." She pointed her fork at him. "Good. Don't hire another Kennedy." "I don't plan to." Her eyes sparkled. "Maybe you should let me interview the next one." Jameson smiled wide. That might not be such a bad idea. As they finished their meal, the city lights began to flicker on one by one. From the window, the skyline glowed with warmth and possibility. And for the first time in a long, long while, Jameson felt something he hadn't allowed himself to feel. Peace. But buried beneath that peace was something else rising, a quiet, determined idea. Not revenge. Not rebuilding. Legacy. And Nyla, though she didn't know it yet, was going to be part of it. The next morning, Jameson stood at the edge of the Reed Tech rooftop garden, sipping black coffee from a ceramic mug. The early sun cast long golden lines over the skyline, and a low breeze rustled through the trees planted in large, modern stone planters. Below, the city stirred to life, unaware that its tech darling had survived an attempted corporate coup less than 24 hours earlier. He checked his watch, 7:58 a.m. The internal audit team was due at 9. His legal advisors, new, vetted, and fiercely loyal, were already reviewing access logs, employee contracts, and the damage trail left behind by Maurice and Kennedy. Behind him, soft footsteps approached. "You're up early," Nyla said, yawning and rubbing her eyes. She wore one of Jameson's oversized sweatshirts, practically a blanket on her. He smiled. "I never sleep well after big battles. I guess I'm still on high alert." She stepped beside him, squinting into the sun. "It doesn't feel like a battle. It feels like a storm passed." He nodded. "A storm we barely saw coming. And we only got through it because you saw the first cloud." She grinned, pleased. "You're getting better with metaphors." He laughed, shaking his head. "Careful. You'll start critiquing my boardroom speeches next." She folded her arms, pretending to think. "Actually, that one time when you told the team, let's circle back and realign our future-facing goals, that was kinda boring." He feigned offense. "That was a strategic alignment speech." She shrugged. It sounded like a sleeping pill. They both laughed, the kind that comes from surviving something impossible together. Then Jameson turned serious. "Today everything changes," he said. "The people Maurice brought in, the systems Kennedy manipulated, it all gets reset. We rebuild. From the ground up." Nyla nodded. "Are you scared?" "Not of them," he said. "But I am scared of missing things again. Of putting my trust in the wrong hands. Of being blind when I need to see." She thought for a moment, then said softly, "That's why I think I was supposed to meet you." He turned to her. "What do you mean?" She looked out over the edge, eyes locked on the horizon. "Because I notice things. I always have. And you needed someone like that." He didn't answer for a moment, just watched her. 7 years old, but speaking like someone who'd carried more than her share of adult burdens. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't warned me that night," he said quietly. "I really don't." "You would have lost everything," she replied. "And I would have lost the only person who's ever listened to me." The truth in her words hit harder than he expected. He crouched beside her, lowering himself to eye level. "You know what I'm thinking about," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You're going to say something dramatic, aren't you?" He laughed again. Maybe. But it's true. I'm thinking about what happens when people like us, people who've been underestimated, decide we're not going to be invisible anymore. Her gaze sharpened. We make noise. Exactly, he said. We take up space. And we build something better than what came before. She smiled. You're getting better at this. He stood and checked his watch again. Come on, he said. Let's get ready for the auditors. You'll want to see this part too. Do I get a badge or something? She asked as they walked inside. He pretended to think. Not yet, but maybe a nameplate? Her eyes lit up. With glitter. He chuckled. If it keeps you on the team, I'll make it sparkle. And as they stepped back into the building, the same one that had nearly been stolen from him, Jameson didn't feel like a CEO picking up the pieces. He felt like someone starting fresh, with a better team than he'd ever had before. By 9 a.m., the Reed Tech conference room was filled with the kind of quiet tension that only lawyers, auditors, and high-level executives could create. Laptops clicked. Files slid across the long glass table. Legal pads filled with scribbled notes were passed between suits. On the massive screen at the front of the room, a digital map of the company's infrastructure blinked in real time, flagging every access point, login credential, and software discrepancy left behind by Maurice and Kennedy. Jameson sat at the head of the table, composed, confident, but fully alert. This wasn't a day for assumptions. Nyla sat beside him with her elbows on the table, chin resting on her fists, watching everyone with laser focus. She had a brand new notepad open and was jotting things down, even if most of it was her own shorthand. Across from her, a tall woman with a braided bun and sharp, serious eyes adjusted her glasses. Her name was Tasha Ellington, Reed Tech's newly appointed interim compliance director. She'd come out of retirement for this. She didn't smile much. Jameson respected that. Preliminary forensic audit confirms what Mr. Reed and Mr. Cole suspected. She began, scrolling through her report. 2 shell companies under Kennedy Brooks' alias, one under Maurice Graves. The invoices were routed through a payment subsidiary that hadn't been audited since 2017. That stops now. Jameson nodded. And employee accounts. Tasha looked up. 12 staffers were promoted or repositioned in the last year under false merit reviews, entirely pushed through by Kennedy. We flagged them all for reevaluation. Some may have been complicit. Others just pawns. He clenched his jaw. I want fairness, but I also want full accountability. We're on it. Across the room, Elijah leaned against the wall, arms folded. The Japanese delegation appreciated your transparency. I spoke with Mr. Takeda this morning. They're still open to the deal, under new conditions. They want a direct relationship with you, Jameson. No middlemen. No silent partners. Jameson allowed himself a slow breath of relief. That's more than I expected. They respect honor, Elijah said. And you proved you still have yours. At that moment, Nyla raised her hand like she was in class. Everyone turned. She said, if 12 people got moved into fake positions, what happens to the real people who were supposed to get them? Tasha blinked, surprised. That's a good question. Nyla shrugged. Seems like some people might have lost their chance just because they weren't friends with the wrong people. Jameson looked at Tasha. Make that part of the internal review. Anyone who was skipped or demoted unfairly, give them a chance to re-interview. And make it transparent. Tasha nodded, impressed. Consider it done. Jameson leaned toward Nyla, smiling. You keep this up, and I'm going to start thinking about where to put your office. She grinned. Corner view, please. Laughter broke out around the table. The mood lightened, even if only for a moment. Then Tasha closed her laptop and folded her hands. One more thing, she said. We've been reviewing the background of everyone with access to sensitive data. And something came up. About a name. Jameson stiffened. What name? Tasha glanced at her notes. Joel Carter. His blood ran cold. Nyla looked up instantly. That's my grandma. Tasha looked between them. We found her in an old vendor file, contracted briefly by the company in 2009 as a night security consultant. No formal role, just listed as a temp hire. Her clearance was revoked after 3 months. But she turned the screen toward them. There's an incident report filed in 2010. A fire in the East Annex. It was quickly contained, no injuries. But Joel Carter is the one who pulled the alarm and evacuated the night staff. It wasn't in her job description. It wasn't even her shift. but she happened to be there. Saved 3 lives. Jameson stared at the screen, stunned. She never told anyone? Tasha shook her head. We only found it by digging through the old paper logs. The file was buried, and never flagged again. Nyla's voice was barely a whisper. She told me she used to clean buildings. Said sometimes she worked at night, but I didn't know it was here. Jameson swallowed hard. Neither did I. A silence fell over the room, not heavy but reverent. Then Jameson stood slowly. I want her name added to our founder's wall. Tasha blinked. Sir, that's usually reserved for, I know who it's for, he interrupted gently. And she belongs there. He looked at Nyla. She saved this place once. You just saved it again. Nyla's eyes glistened. She looked down at her notebook, then back up at Jameson. Maybe I don't need a glitter nameplate after all, she said. He smiled. No, Nyla. You're getting both. Later that afternoon, the founder's wall glistened beneath soft ceiling lights, its brushed steel panels etched with the names of Reed Tech's most pivotal contributors, co-founders, innovators, advisors. It stood in the center of the company's entrance lobby, a quiet monument to legacy. And now, a new name was being added. Joelle Carter. Beneath it, a short inscription, for seeing what others missed, for acting when no one else would. Nyla stood in front of the wall, her eyes wide as she read the letters again and again. Her fingers traced the name with the reverence of someone touching something sacred. She used to say she was nobody, she whispered. Just a tired woman with a broom and a bad back. She was never nobody, Jameson said beside her. And neither are you. A small group of employees had gathered nearby, some familiar faces, some new. A few had known Joelle in passing years ago. Others only now realized who had once walked their halls at night, quietly protecting the building, without any glory. Tasha stepped forward, clearing her throat. I've worked in corporate law for 30 years, she said. I've seen a lot of walls like this. Most names up here earned their place with stock options or high-level strategy. She nodded toward Joelle's name. This one earned hers by doing what was right, not because she had to, but because she chose to. That's the kind of legacy this company needs to honor. That's what rebuilding looks like. Applause rippled through the space. Not loud. Not for show. Just real. Nyla turned to Jameson. She would have cried if she saw this. She sees it, he said gently. A few feet away, Elijah leaned against a marble column, arms folded, smiling faintly. When their eyes met, he gave Jameson a slow nod of approval. After the small ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and the last of the legal teams returned to their audits, Jameson and Nyla sat together on a bench beneath a large indoor ficus tree near the lobby windows. She held a printed photo someone had found, an old security staff group shot from 2009. There was Joelle, standing off to the side, her eyes tired but alert, wearing a plain blue jacket and the hint of a smile. I didn't know she had a job like that, Nyla said. She always made it seem like she just cleaned. Jameson watched the photo. She probably didn't want you to worry. Or maybe she didn't think anyone would care. She was wrong, Nyla whispered. She mattered. He nodded. So do you. She looked up at him, a quiet seriousness in her face. You know you're different now, right? Different how? Before, you walked like someone who had to be in charge. Like someone trying not to fall apart. Now you walk like you know who you are. Even if everything had been taken away. He sat back, stunned by how precisely she saw through him. Losing everything makes you remember what really matters, he said. And sometimes, it gives you the chance to rebuild it better. She tilted her head. So what now? He smiled. Now, we keep rebuilding. That evening, back in his office, Jameson opened a new project folder on his desktop, the Carter Initiative. It would be Reed Tech's first internal mentorship and protection program, a hybrid of education, housing assistance, and scholarship funding for children like Nyla and workers like Joelle. People too often overlooked. People who noticed everything and said nothing because no one ever asked them to speak. Now they'd be invited in. Now they'd lead. He typed the first sentence of the mission statement himself. This initiative is dedicated to those who saw the cracks before they split the walls. To those who heard danger whispering and chose to act anyway. He paused, then smiled to himself. And then he added, founded in honor of Joelle Carter and her granddaughter Nyla. 3 days later, Jameson stepped into one of the older wings of Reed Tech, an underused cluster of offices and training rooms that had mostly gathered dust since the company's last expansion. But today, that was changing. The hallway buzzed with motion. Painters rolled fresh coats of soft blue and gold across the walls. Carpenters moved in new desks. A brand new plaque above the entrance read, "The Carter Center, Observation. Integrity. Leadership." Inside, Tasha was directing a group of interns, clipboard in hand. Elijah was overseeing the installation of new security panels. And Nyla, she was walking the floor like she owned it. Jameson watched her from the doorway, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. She wore custom name badge now, Nyla Carter, Junior Advisor, Carter Initiative. And underneath, in bold silver letters, "She sees what others miss." He approached just as she was reviewing a list of books to be added to the small reading nook near the windows. "These are mostly business books," she said, flipping through the list. "Where are the ones for regular kids?" Tasha raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "Like stories about kids who had to figure stuff out on their own. Street-smart books. Books where nobody's a superhero, but they still win." Jameson stepped in. "Add anything she recommends." Tasha smiled. "Already done." Nyla looked up at him. "You're really building it." "We're really building it," he corrected. "This is as much yours as it is mine." She took a breath. "Can I tell you something? But promise you won't think it's silly?" He crouched down beside her. "Promise." She looked around the room, then leaned in slightly. "I think my grandma knew. Somehow. I think she knew something like this would happen. That one day, someone would see what she did and care." Jameson didn't laugh. He didn't say a word for a moment. Then he looked her in the eye and said, "I believe that, too." From behind them, Elijah called out, "You might want to see this." They followed him to one of the far offices, one that had once been used for storage. Workers had pulled out old boxes and unearthed file cabinets long untouched. And in one of them, tucked inside a manila folder labeled Incident Reports, 2010, was a handwritten note. Nyla reached for it, heart pounding. It read, "To whoever reads this, if something ever happens to me, just know I tried to do the right thing. Even when no one was watching. Especially then. J.C." Nyla's hands trembled as she held the note. "It's her." Jameson gently took it and read it aloud again, slower this time. Then he looked at Nyla, voice soft. She knew. Tasha stepped forward. "We can frame it. Hang it in the Carter Center's front hall." Nyla nodded quickly. "Yes. Right next to the picture of her. People need to see it." The room fell quiet. And then Elijah, in his usual dry tone, said, "You realize we just turned a dusty wing into the soul of this company, right?" Jameson looked around at the half-finished space, the light pouring in through the tall windows, the team forming in every corner. "No," he said. "We turned a whisper into a legacy." That evening, after the workers left and the sun dipped behind the skyline, Jameson and Nyla stood alone in the newly finished lobby of the Carter Center. He turned to her. "You changed my life." She looked up at him, serious and sure. "You gave me one." Neither of them said anything more. They didn't have to. The walls would speak for them now. 1 week later, the Carter Center officially opened. The ceremony was small by design, no press, no red carpet, no corporate PR spin. Just staff, mentors, and a handful of children handpicked from shelters, youth programs, and overlooked corners of the city. Kids like Nyla, who saw the world clearly but rarely had anyone look back at them with the same focus. The lobby buzzed with nervous energy as the first group of 10 arrived, clutching paper welcome packets and wearing wide-eyed expressions that ranged from hopeful to wary. Jameson stood near the entrance, dressed not in his usual suit, but in jeans and a black sweater, approachable. Human. He didn't want to be a CEO today. He wanted to be present. Nyla stood beside him, proudly wearing her glitter pen badge and a fresh braid crown in her hair. She clutched a clipboard, pretending to check names, even though she'd memorized every one. "There's Jarrell," she whispered as a boy about her age walked in, his eyes darting like he expected someone to stop him. "He's smart. Doesn't say much, but he notices everything." Jameson nodded. "And the girl in the orange coat? That's Cameron. She fixed a broken vending machine at the shelter once using a paper clip. I want her in the coding class." "You're already curating your future board of directors," he joked. "I'm just building my team," she said with a shrug. The room quieted as Jameson stepped forward, gently tapping a spoon against his coffee cup to call for attention. The soft clinking echoed, and the children turned toward him. He looked around the room before speaking. "I want to welcome each of you to the Carter Center. You don't know me yet, but I already know you because I was like you once. Watching. listening, figuring things out without much help. He paused, glancing at Nyla. And I built a company by doing all of that. But not long ago, I almost lost everything. Not because I failed, but because I trusted the wrong people and ignored the quiet voices trying to warn me. He let that land before continuing. One of those voices, he said, placing a hand gently on Nyla's shoulder, stood right where you are not long ago. And instead of staying silent, she spoke up. Some of the kids glanced at her. Nyla straightened her spine, eyes forward. So this place. Jameson continued. It's not charity. It's not pity. It's investment. Because I believe the most powerful leaders in the world are not the ones who talk the loudest. They're the ones who see the most, feel the deepest, and act the fastest when something's not right. He gestured to the rest of the building. This is your space. Ask questions. Break things. Fix them. Tell the truth, even when it's scary. That's how you become more than just a name on a file. That's how you become a force. A few of the kids nodded slowly. One clapped awkwardly at first, but others followed, unsure but warming up. After the speech, Nyla led the first small tour. This is the observatory room, she explained, showing off a studio line with security monitors, audio gear, and screen readers. We're going to learn how to notice the stuff adults miss, like patterns, lies, and setups. Like spies, one of the boys asked. Like protectors, she replied. And over here's the coding lounge. Don't worry if you've never done it. We're all gonna start with the basics. Even if your brain hates math, you'll get it. Jameson watched her lead, a mixture of pride and awe swelling in his chest. She wasn't pretending to be someone important. She was someone important. As the children settled into their new home, taking their first hesitant steps toward believing in themselves, Jameson stepped outside to the courtyard to take a call. Mr. Takeda, from Saito and Kinshir, spoke on the other end of the line. We reviewed the new merger terms, he said. Very transparent. Very smart. This proposal, Mr. Reed, it reflects a leader who has learned deeply. I've had a good teacher, Jameson said. Then you should know, Takeda continued, we would like to reschedule the signing. In your city. At your table. On your terms. Jameson felt something shift in his chest, not just victory, but clarity. The kind that comes from burning through illusion and standing in something real. He smiled into the phone. Let's make it happen. And in that moment, standing beneath a banner that read, Integrity starts with observation, he knew the company had been saved. His name had been cleared. But more than anything, a legacy had begun. Later that evening, Jameson stood in his office, lights dimmed, watching the city pulse beneath the skyline. Below him, Reed Tech glowed with a new kind of energy, not the sterile hum of a tech empire, but the quiet, grounded momentum of a place rediscovering its purpose. The Carter Center's opening had been more than a symbolic gesture. It was a reset, a declaration. He turned toward the framed photo on his desk, a candid shot taken that morning. Nyla stood in front of the new mentorship wall, arms crossed, chin tilted, grinning like someone who just outsmarted the entire world. And she had. Jameson smiled. Just then, his phone buzzed. A message from Elijah. You might want to see this. Attached was a screenshot of a social media post. The caption read, the former assistant and partner of Reed Tech's CEO, now facing federal charges for fraud and embezzlement, have filed for separate legal counsel, each blaming the other. Hashtag fall from grace, hashtag corporate justice. Jameson shook his head, not with glee, but with finality. Let them scramble. Let them fracture. The truth didn't need to shout anymore. It had already spoken. A knock came at the door. Come in, he said. Nyla stepped in, a tablet tucked under her arm. She wore a new hoodie, navy with gold stitching that read, Observer-in-Chief. The title had been her idea. I wrote something, she said, and I think it should go in the front of the next student handbook, for the kids who come after. He nodded. Let's hear it. She cleared her throat, straightened her shoulders, and read. Some people think being quiet makes you weak. But quiet people see things loud people don't. We notice the shift in someone's voice. The way a smile can hide a knife. We feel tension in the room before anyone speaks. We don't interrupt because we're scared, we're studying. So if you're quiet, stay that way. But never be silent when it matters. She paused, then looked up. Too much. Jameson's throat tightened. No, it's perfect. She handed him the tablet, cheeks flushed. Put it wherever it fits. He walked over to the company's digital vision board, a touchscreen wall used for internal inspiration, and uploaded the quote directly beneath the Reed Tech mission statement. He typed the credit line himself. Nyla Carter, age 7. Junior Advisor, Carter Initiative. She watched him, quiet, then asked, "Do you think people will really listen?" He turned to her. "I think they already are." They sat in silence for a while, watching the evening fade into night. Eventually, she asked, "Did you always want to be a CEO?" "No," he admitted. "I wanted to make something no one could take away from me." Did it work? He thought about it. The years of building, the betrayal, the collapse, the rescue. The little girl who'd climbed into his car and flipped his entire world upside down. "Not at first," he said. "But now, yeah, I think it finally did." She leaned back in the chair. "I still miss Grandma." "I do too," he said softly. They sat like that a bit longer, and then she smiled. "She'd like this place," Nyla whispered. Jameson looked out the window, eyes tracing the outline of the Carter Center glowing across the courtyard. "She already does." The next morning, sunlight filtered through the glass panels of the Carter Center's east wing, casting golden lines across the polished floors. The building was quieter than usual. Classes hadn't started yet, and most staff hadn't arrived. But in the observatory room, Nyla sat alone at the central table, flipping through a stack of applications. They were from local schools, community centers, and shelters, kids hoping to join the second wave of the mentorship program. She circled names, drew stars next to others, wrote question marks beside a few. Each one represented someone like her. Someone who had seen too much, too soon, and still chose to notice rather than shut down. Elijah stepped in quietly, carrying a fresh printout of surveillance logs. "You're up early," he said. "So are you," she replied, without looking up. "Touché." He set the files down and glanced over her shoulder. "You're ranking applicants." She nodded, based on how observant their essays are. One kid described the sound the hallway floor makes before the janitor cart turns the corner. "That's high-level stuff." Elijah chuckled. "You're turning this into an intelligence agency." She grinned. "I just want people who see. The ones who don't get distracted by noise." He grew quiet, then said, "Your grandmother would be proud, you know." "I hope so." "No, I know so." She gave a soft smile, then looked at him. "How long have you known Mr. Jameson?" 15 years, give or take. "Did he used to be different?" Elijah nodded. "Back then, he was driven, focused, but closed off. Like a man sprinting uphill in the dark. Always moving, but not always knowing why." She thought about that. "And now?" "Now," Elijah said, folding his arms, "he's sprinting with purpose. And he finally knows who he's running for." Just then, Jameson appeared in the doorway, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a juice box tucked under his arm. "Hope I'm not interrupting," he said. Nyla pointed at the juice box. "Is that mine?" He held it out like an offering. "Organic apple. Only the best for Reed Tech's junior advisor." She grabbed it with a smirk. "You're learning." Jameson sipped his coffee, then looked around the observatory. The walls were lined with photos now, early Carter Center moments, candid shots of kids tinkering with old circuit boards, whiteboards filled with ideas, poetry fragments, invention sketches. On the far end of the room, beneath a framed quote from Joel Carter, was a new board, the Quiet Wall. It held letters written by students, short messages about moments when they noticed something that changed a situation. A lie caught, a pattern seen, a decision redirected. "Cameron spotted a teacher's assistant stealing grant money," Nyla said, pointing to one of the pinned letters. "Seriously," Jameson said, raising his eyebrows. "She didn't say anything for 2 weeks. She watched first, then told me. And you?" I passed it to the internal team. Quietly. Jameson smiled, full of pride. "Looks like someone's been paying attention." "I pay attention to everything," she said matter-of-factly. There was a knock on the window behind them. Tasha stood outside, waving a thick envelope in the air. Jameson stepped out to meet her. She handed him the envelope with a wide grin. "The federal case against Maurice and Kennedy is officially going to trial," she said. "They're being indicted on all counts. No deals, no dismissals, maximum penalties if convicted." He exhaled. "They deserve every minute of it." Tasha nodded, and their attorneys tried to leak false stories to the press. But guess what? We had recordings. Nyla's tapes locked it down. Jameson looked through the glass into the observatory room, where Nyla was now reviewing a circuit diagram on the wall. She's 7, he said. Tasha smiled. Yeah, 7 going on genius. Later that day, during lunch break, Nyla sat with Jameson on the rooftop garden again, legs swinging over the bench, sipping another juice box. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't been in your car that night? She asked. He didn't answer immediately. He let the wind move around them, let the silence speak first. Then he said, I would have signed the merger. Lost everything. Probably never even known it was you who saved me. She looked down. Sometimes I wonder if it was fate. I used to think fate was just something people said when they couldn't explain stuff, he replied. But now, I think fate is what happens when someone pays attention. She nodded slowly. Then she whispered, do you think there are other kids out there who see things like I did, but no one believes them? He looked at her with a steady gaze. Yes, and that's why we're going to find them. She smiled, turning her face toward the sun. They didn't need applause. They didn't need headlines. They just needed each other, and the courage to listen when the world stayed loud. Because the quietest people were often the ones who changed everything. A week later, Reed Tech's auditorium filled with over 200 employees, engineers, analysts, designers, security staff, even custodians. It wasn't a mandatory meeting, but word had spread quickly. Jameson Reed was making his first full company address since the failed takeover. The lights dimmed. The stage was bare, no podium, no projections. Just a single chair and a wooden stool holding a glass of water. Jameson stepped into view wearing a simple button-down and slacks, no tie, no title. He paused in the spotlight, scanning the crowd. Most of you know what happened, he began. Or think you know. Silence. Eyes fixed on him. Maurice Graves and Kennedy Brooks nearly succeeded in stealing this company. They used my trust, my routines, and my silence against me. And I almost let them. He walked slowly to center stage. I could stand here and give you a list of everything they did wrong. But this isn't about them. He looked toward the back of the room, where Nyla sat in the last row beside Elijah and Tasha, legs crossed, eyes sharp. This is about you. And the people who keep companies like this alive, not just by working, but by watching, by noticing, by acting. He paused. I let things slide. I didn't ask enough questions. I gave the benefit of the doubt when I should have asked for proof. And it almost cost us everything. Murmurs swept softly through the room. A few heads nodded. I tell you this not to scare you, but to invite you, he continued. Invite you into a new version of Reed Tech, one where silence isn't loyalty. One where hierarchy doesn't equal blindness. One where even a 7-year-old can be the difference between collapse and survival. He gestured to the back. Her name is Nyla Carter. She's not an employee. She's not an executive. She's not someone with a degree or a resume. She's someone who saw something, and she had the courage to speak up. All eyes turned to the back row. Nyla shrank a little in her seat, then straightened her back. Elijah leaned down and whispered, You're doing great, kid. Jameson turned back to the audience. So we're creating a new system, company-wide. It's called the Carter Watch. It will empower anyone in this building, whether you're in accounting or security, cleaning staff or upper management, to report suspicious behavior, irregularities, or even just instincts. And we will listen. There was a quiet tension in the air, the kind that came from people realizing change was actually happening. And for those of you who ever felt overlooked, Jameson added, know this, your silence was never invisibility. It was observation. And from this day forward, your voice matters. Applause broke out. Not thunderous. Not performative. Just genuine. Jameson nodded once, then stepped off the stage. Backstage, he found Nyla waiting, arms crossed. You didn't tell me you were going to name it after me, she said. You don't like it. She hesitated. I like it, but now it feels real. He smiled. It is real. She looked down at her shoes. Do you think they'll really listen? I think they just did. She let out a slow breath. Okay, but if anyone gets weird about it, I'm not afraid to call them out. Jameson chuckled. I'm counting on it. Later that evening, they returned to the Carter Center. The new group of students had arrived and were already scattered across the lounge, some building robots, others solving logic puzzles, a few curled up with graphic novels in the corner. Cameron waved from the coding station. Nyla, I made a fake website that looks real. Want to see how I trap phishing scams? On my way, Nyla called back. Before she ran off, she turned to Jameson. Thanks for the speech. He raised an eyebrow. You watched the whole thing. Every word. She smirked, then added, "Next time, maybe start with the 7-year-old saves the company part. That would have been a good opener." He laughed. "Duly noted." As she ran off to join the other kids, Jameson stood there for a moment longer. The company had been tested. His leadership had been questioned. And the quietest voice in the building had become its loudest truth. And now, the rebuild wasn't just financial. It was cultural. It was human. It was personal. Because in a world where deception whispered in boardrooms and betrayal wore a smile, observation had become Reed Tekka's sharpest weapon. And Nyla Carter, age 7, was its clearest eye. The following morning, Jameson stood in the conference room overlooking the city, flipping through a folder of security revisions. Sunlight spilled across the glass table, casting long shadows that reminded him how close everything had come to disappearing. Tasha entered without knocking, holding her own set of documents. "Thought you'd want this," she said. Updated risk assessments and revised protocol drafts for the Carter watch. He accepted the folder and scanned the top page. "Looks good. We're making progress." She took a seat across from him, studying his expression. "You're calmer." Jameson nodded. "Because for the first time, I know what I'm building won't collapse when my back is turned." Tasha tilted her head. "And what exactly are you building now, Jameson?" He set the folder down. "A company that doesn't need to be paranoid because it's paying attention. A company where power isn't hoarded but distributed. A culture where silence is never mistaken for safety." She smiled. "That's not small. It's worth the fight." There was a knock at the door. Nyla peeked in, holding a silver envelope in both hands. "Special delivery." Jameson waved her in. "What's that?" She skipped to the table, placing the envelope carefully in front of him. It came to the Carter Center's P.O. box this morning. No return address. Tasha raised an eyebrow. "Anonymous." Nyla nodded. "We scanned it for weird powder stuff. Elijah said it's clean." Jameson opened it cautiously. Inside was a single-type page and a glossy, high-resolution photo. The photo showed Kennedy and Maurice being escorted out of a federal courthouse, handcuffed, surrounded by reporters. The letter read, "Thought you'd want to frame the moment you didn't fold. A friend who used to be afraid to speak." Jameson stared at the letter for a long moment, his throat tightening, not from pride, but from recognition. Someone out there had seen everything and stayed silent. Until now. He passed the letter to Tasha, then looked at Nyla. "There are more of you out there," he said softly. She shrugged. "Told you." He looked at the photo again. Kennedy's face was stiff and stoic, while Maurice looked like he still couldn't believe the cameras weren't for his victory. Jameson slid the photo into a drawer, not for display, but for record. A reminder. Tasha stood. "I'll get the Carter watch protocols finalized. You'll have the vote from the board this week." "Thanks, Tasha," he said. As she left, Nyla remained, spinning slowly in the conference chair. "Hey," she said, "when's the trial?" Pre-trial hearings started this week. Official trial starts in 3 months. "You going?" He hesitated. "Probably. Not for revenge, just to witness it." She nodded. "That's fair." He turned to her. "Do you want to go?" She blinked, surprised. "Me? You started this." She looked down, thoughtful. "If I go, do I have to speak?" "No. Just observe." She smiled slowly. "That's what I do best." That night, Jameson found himself unable to sleep. He sat at his desk long after the building emptied, watching the glowing Carter Center across the courtyard. He opened his journal, a private document he hadn't touched in years. The last entry had been written the day Reed Tech crossed the $100 million mark. The tone of it now felt hollow. He started a new page. "They almost took everything from me. But Child gave it back. Not with money, not with strategy, with truth, with boldness, with observation. And now I see. It's not about what I build. It's about who I build it with." He hit save. Across the building, the lights in the Carter Center flickered off, one by one. And Jameson knew he wasn't just leading a company anymore. He was leading a movement. 3 days later, Jameson stood on the courthouse steps, the early morning air crisp against his skin. Across the plaza, news vans lined the street, reporters adjusting their microphones, photographers checking camera angles. The trial of Maurice Graves and Kennedy Brooks was officially underway. Jameson hadn't come for the spectacle. He came for the closure. Beside him, Nyla stood quietly, dressed in a navy coat and red scarf, her curls pulled back in a neat ponytail. She held a thermos of hot chocolate, both hands wrapped around it. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "Just watching. Like always." Security escorted them inside through a private entrance. The courtroom was large and sterile, marble floors, wooden pews, fluorescent lights. A few familiar faces from Reed Tekka's legal department sat quietly near the back. Jameson took his seat at the front. Nyla sat beside him, her feet not quite reaching the floor, eyes scanning every corner. The doors opened again. Maurice and Kennedy were led in by federal marshals. They wore dark suits, but no masks of charm this time. Morris's hair was thinner, his face tighter, and Kennedy, her eyes were hollow. Neither of them looked toward Jameson. Not once. Nyla leaned in and whispered, "They look smaller." Jameson nodded. "They are." The judge entered. Proceedings began. Legal jargon filled the air. Wire fraud, embezzlement, corporate conspiracy, intent to defraud. Witness lists were read. Evidence chains introduced. And then one name stood out. "We call to the stand, Nyla Carter." Jameson froze. His eyes flicked to the prosecutor's table. It had been a late addition. Optional. She hadn't been required. But someone on the team believed her words might offer something more, a human truth the jury needed to feel. Nyla looked up at him. "You don't have to," he whispered quickly. She took a breath. "I want to." The bailiff led her gently to the stand. She was barely visible behind the large wooden box, her head just above the microphone. Someone brought a booster cushion. She didn't smile. She didn't fidget. She looked straight ahead. The prosecutor approached. "Nyla, can you tell us how you came to meet Mr. Jameson Reed?" "I was hiding in his car," she said simply. A soft ripple of surprise moved through the room. "Why were you hiding?" "Because I heard two people talking about him upstairs. They said he was going to sign away his company without knowing. That he was dumb. That they were going to take everything from him." "Did you know who they were?" "Yes. I saw them. Maurice and Kennedy." Maurice flinched in his seat. "And why did you decide to warn Mr. Reed?" Nyla paused, then said, "Because nobody warned my grandma. And she deserved better. So did he." The prosecutor blinked, caught off guard by the weight of that answer. "Were you scared?" "A little," Nyla admitted. "But my grandma always said if you see someone getting stepped on, and you can help, you help. Because next time it could be you." In the front row, Jameson sat motionless, his throat tight, his heart pounding. The prosecutor smiled softly. "Thank you, Nyla." The defense attorney stood, smoothing her suit. "Nyla, you're 7. Do you think you really understood what you overheard?" Nyla looked at her, expression unshaken. "I understood that they were laughing at someone who trusted them. I understood that they didn't think he was smart enough to stop them. And I understood that they were proud of tricking him." The courtroom went silent. "Nothing else to add," the defense attorney muttered, sitting down. The judge thanked Nyla and dismissed her. She climbed down from the stand and returned to her seat beside Jameson, face calm, fingers steady. He leaned down. "You were incredible." She shrugged. "I just told the truth." Later, outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed for statements. Jameson shielded Nyla with his arm as Elijah emerged from the crowd, his phone in hand. "Media's already calling her the quiet whistleblower," he said with a smirk. "She's more than that," Jameson replied. "She's the voice that made everything else loud." That evening, back at the Carter Center, a group of students waited with snacks and celebration signs they had made themselves. "Go Nyla. Truth wins. Watch her see everything." Cameron ran up and hugged her tight. "You roasted them." Nyla blushed. "I just told the story." As the others celebrated, Jameson walked to the edge of the Carter Center's observation room and looked out over the glowing skyline. Elijah joined him. "You think the jury will convict?" Jameson nodded. They heard everything they needed. The evidence, the lies, the arrogance. He glanced back at Nyla. "And the truth." He looked down at the building blueprints on the table beside him, plans for Carter Centers in 2 more cities. New funding. New outreach. This wasn't just a story about one betrayal anymore. It was the beginning of something bigger. And it was still unfolding. 2 weeks later, the verdict came in. Guilty. On all charges. Maurice Graves and Kennedy Brooks were found responsible for wire fraud, embezzlement, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and multiple counts of corporate misconduct. The judge didn't hesitate. Sentencing would follow in a month, but everyone knew the outcome would be severe. When the ruling was read aloud, Jameson sat stone still in the courtroom. No fist pump. No smile. Just a slow exhale, like something heavy he'd been carrying for years had finally fallen away. Next to him, Nyla squeezed his hand tightly. "They can't steal anything else now," she whispered. "No," he said. "They can't." After court adjourned, they stepped out into sunlight again. But this time, it felt different, warmer. Not blinding, but steady. A kind of light that didn't demand attention, but revealed what needed to be seen. Elijah met them on the courthouse steps with a rare, genuine grin. The board just issued a full company-wide statement. No sugarcoating. Total transparency. Reed Techa's stock rose 5% this morning, just from people believing in accountability. Jameson shook his head. Accountability is trending now? Miracles do happen. Nyla laughed. Told you the truth matters. Reporters called after them, flashing microphones and cameras, shouting questions about the verdict. Jameson raised a hand, signaling for quiet. Then he stepped forward and said just one sentence. "Let this be a reminder. Trust is not weakness, and silence is not consent." And with that, he turned away. No gloating. No drama. Just truth, left behind like a trail. Back at the Carter Center that afternoon, a celebration was quietly taking shape. Staff decorated the walls with hand-drawn posters made by students. Justice isn't loud, it's clear. Observe. Speak. Change everything. We are not invisible. Cameron led a team baking cookies in the small teaching kitchen. Jarrell programmed a scrolling LED sign that blinked, "We see you, liars." Everyone laughed, especially Nyla. She stood at the center of it all, surrounded by kids who'd once felt like shadows in a world too noisy to hear them. Now they had a place. A name. A mission. Jameson watched from the doorway, holding a small gift bag behind his back. When the crowd thinned, he approached Nyla and handed it to her. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a custom plaque. Sleek. Matte black. Etched in gold. Nyla Carter Founders Circle, Reed Tech, and the Carter Initiative. She saw what no one else would. Her eyes went wide. "I'm not even grown yet." He smiled. "You didn't need to be. You already changed the world." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Grandma would have made me hang this next to the fridge." She'd be right. She hugged him tightly, burying her face in his sweater. When she pulled back, she said, "Okay, now you have to get me my own office." Jameson laughed. "Deal. But only if you help me with the next phase." She tilted her head. "There's more." He nodded. "We're expanding. The Carter Center is going to D.C., Atlanta, and Chicago. Other companies want to license our model. I need someone to help me vet them." Nyla's mouth dropped. "Like, decide who's allowed to copy us." "Exactly." Her eyes narrowed, thinking. "I'll need a clipboard. And snacks." Done. That night, as the city hummed in its usual rhythm, Jameson stood once more in his office, staring at the glowing lights of the Carter Center across the courtyard. This wasn't the ending he'd imagined when Maurice and Kennedy betrayed him. It was better. Because real justice didn't come from punishment, it came from prevention. From creating something that couldn't be stolen again. From empowering the people who were never supposed to lead. From letting the watchers speak. And Nyla Carter had spoken louder than anyone. 1 month later, the sentencing hearing arrived. Jameson didn't plan to attend. He told himself it was over, that the chapter had closed the moment the verdict came in. But something pulled him back, something that felt less like revenge and more like responsibility. He didn't go for Maurice or Kennedy. He went for the truth they'd never been able to face. The courtroom was quieter this time. Less media. Less tension. Just the low murmur of lawyers and the steady tick of the courtroom clock. Jameson sat alone in the middle row, no entourage, no fanfare. Just a worn notepad in his lap, and a pen between his fingers. If today brought closure, he wanted to write it down himself. Maurice entered first. Shackled, shoulders slumped, dressed in a beige prison-issued jumpsuit. He no longer looked like a man who once pitched billion-dollar mergers with champagne in hand. Then came Kennedy. Her blonde hair was pinned back, her face pale, lips tight. She scanned the room. Her eyes landed on Jameson and stayed there. But he didn't flinch. The judge entered. The room rose. The proceedings began. Statements were read. Final evidence reviewed. The courtroom moved like clockwork. And then came the sentencing. Maurice Graves, 18 years in federal prison. Kennedy Brooks, 14 years. No possibility of parole for either until serving 85% of their time. Gasps echoed faintly. Maurice clenched his fists. Kennedy closed her eyes. The judge's voice was calm but unforgiving. This court finds that both defendants weaponized trust and manipulated silence to construct a scheme designed not just to defraud, but to humiliate, to erase, and to dismantle a legacy that was never theirs to take. And then, surprisingly, the judge looked toward Jameson. You may not realize this, Mr. Reed, but your refusal to retaliate, your insistence on truth over spectacle, set a precedent in this courtroom. And in your industry. Jameson gave a small nod. Then, something unexpected happened. The judge said the court will allow a brief statement from Mr. Reed if he chooses. Jameson stood slowly, walked to the center of the room. No notes, no anger, just presence. He turned to face Maurice and Kennedy. You didn't just steal money, he said. You tried to take something deeper, belief. You wanted me to stop believing in people, in decency, in loyalty, in trust. He paused, eyes steady. And for a while I almost did. He glanced down, then continued. But someone I barely knew reminded me that silence isn't weakness. That watching carefully doesn't make you passive, it makes you prepared. And because of her, I didn't just survive what you did. I rebuilt stronger. He turned back to the judge. That's all. He returned to his seat. The courtroom slowly emptied. Maurice and Kennedy were escorted out, heads lowered, futures sealed. Jameson walked out into the bright courthouse plaza alone. But he didn't stay alone for long. Nyla stood near the fountain, her backpack slung over one shoulder, a lollipop in her mouth. You said you weren't going, she said. He shrugged. Guess I changed my mind. What did it feel like? Jameson thought for a moment. Final. She nodded. Good. That's how endings are supposed to feel. He smiled. And how do beginnings feel? Nyla looked up at him, squinting into the sunlight. Like possibilities. And snacks. He laughed, ruffling her hair. Let's go get both. As they walked away from the courthouse, side by side, Jameson glanced over his shoulder one last time. Not out of fear, not out of regret, but to confirm what he already knew. The past was behind him. The reckoning was over. And ahead of them, wide open and waiting, was a future no one could ever steal. The following week, Reed Tech's main campus felt transformed, not because of new tech or fresh funding, but because something intangible had shifted. Conversations felt different. Walls that once echoed with silent compliance now pulsed with quiet confidence. People made eye contact. They asked questions. They listened. At the center of it all was the Carter Initiative, which had grown from single wing into a company-wide movement. Internal teams were now required to complete observer training, led by Carter Center mentors. Middle managers were trained to recognize subtle cues of manipulation, isolation, or hidden exploitation. Every department had an assigned watcher now, someone whose job was to notice what others missed. It wasn't a security system. It was a culture reset. And it was working. On a sunny Friday afternoon, Jameson walked through the newly finished East Annex, clipboard in hand. Tasha had asked for one final walkthrough before the next external audit team arrived. But Jameson wasn't really there to inspect. He was there to feel the space, to make sure it still felt like them. In the corner lounge, Nyla sat cross-legged on a beanbag, deep in conversation with a group of 3 new recruits from the second Carter class. And if someone ever makes you feel like noticing things is a weakness, she was saying, you're in the wrong room. The youngest recruit, a quiet boy named Malik, raised his hand. But what if we see something and the adults don't listen? Nyla's response was instant. Then you write it down. You make a record. You find someone who will listen. And if you can't find them, she looked toward Jameson, who had just entered the room. You become them. The kids followed her gaze. Malik's eyes widened. Is that the CEO? Jameson raised a hand. Just a guy with a clipboard. Nyla smirked. He listens. That's what matters. The group scattered off to their breakout sessions, and Jameson joined Nyla by the window. You're building your own army, he said, watching the kids move between rooms. She leaned back, satisfied. Not an army. Just watchers. Quiet people. The ones who've been paying attention their whole lives. He nodded. How do you feel about a national conference next year? Her eyes widened. Seriously, we've already received interest from 5 other companies. Nonprofits. Schools. Some want to license the Carter Watch model. Others want to adopt our internal reporting system. She sat up straighter. Can I speak at the opening? You'd better. They sat for a moment in comfortable silence. Then she said, You know what I don't get? What's that? How someone like Maurice, who worked next to you for 15 years, still thought you were stupid. Jameson looked out the window, thoughtful. People don't always see what's right in front of them, especially when they think they're the smartest one in the room. She raised an eyebrow. You are the smartest one in the room. He chuckled. Not when you're in it. That night, after everyone left, Jameson returned to his office and unlocked the small safe hidden behind a panel in the wall. Inside were 3 items, the transcript of the conversation Nyla had overheard on that first night, the handwritten note Joelle Carter left behind in the 2010 incident file, and a printed photo of the original Carter Center team, Nyla front and center, grinning like she owned the building. He laid them out on his desk, then turned to his computer and opened a blank page titled, The Carter Report, How One Voice Changed a Company. It was time to document everything, not just for ReedTech, but for the world.